And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Today's sea ice analysis completed this Saturday afternoon, showing still a lot of ice up here in Norton Sound, but having trouble getting much in the way of any significant ice around St. Lawrence Island. Heavier ice down here along and just off the southwest coast to the north side of Nunivak Island, and then more scattered ice, definitely a lot lesser down here south of Nunivak Island. Some ice there over northern Kuskokwim Bay, hardly anything there down toward Bristol Bay. And for tonight's forecast, low pressure here over the Alaska Peninsula area, bringing rain and snow there to that area with mixed precipitation with this front across mostly snow in the Kuskokwim Delta, but a mixture of precipitation over Bristol Bay, mainly in the mountainous terrain there, upslope areas. Other areas won't see much at all. Rain, southern Cook Inlet, Kenai Peninsula, and Prince William Sound with pretty good east to southeast winds ahead of that front. And then some of that moisture trying to push into the Copper River Basin. Dry in the interior, pretty windy through the passes of the Brooks Range, but much lighter winds in store for the North Slope and Arctic coast. And then rain mainly along the coast of the Panhandle. And for Sunday, most of the storminess here staying west of the southeast coast, but close enough to bring some pretty good wind and rain into the area there, up along the North Gulf Coast into the Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound area, as well as western Cook Inlet to the eastern slopes of the Alaska Range. Another wet day for Kodiak Island. Windy conditions here, especially the higher elevations of the interior, and high wind warnings continue again. St. Lawrence Island to the western Arctic coast there and the Bering Strait coast for gusts of 75 miles an hour. Snow here now over the Bering Sea, colder air starting to come down. So Pribilof Island, snow or snow showers, mixed precipitation for the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula. And low pressure keeps it wet over Kodiak Island. Next system coming in kind of elongates out here with a new low forming along that front there. So look for rain, Adak and Atka westward. Low pressure, Bristol Bay there, just west of Cape Newenham. Mixed precipitation here, still south to north flow here, keeping it mild and wet, mainly along the North Gulf Coast areas. Some of that precipitation trying to get inland, making inroads there into some areas of the Copper River Basin. And then this warm front here, keeping it mild and wet over the southeast coast. Look for increasing snow here over along the Yukon River Valley, especially the Yukon Flats of the eastern Brooks Range. Coastal water forecasts. Storm warnings, southeast winds, Prince of Wales Island there along the coast. Otherwise, gales here on the central coast, east to southeast winds 40 to 45 knots. And a little bit lighter, but not much. Still east at 30 to 40 knots there for the north coast. Seas running anywhere from 25 to 32 feet. And gale warnings for Clarence Strait. Southeast winds 35 knots, seas 15 feet. Southeast 25 with higher gusts for Stevens Passage. Northeast at 20 with higher gusts for Lynn Canal. And for the day on Monday, south to southeast winds 30 to 35 knots there in the south coast. South 30 to 35 knots on the central coast. And east-southeast at 30 to 35 for the north coast. Small craft advisories for the inside waters there for southeast winds at 25 knots with higher gusts. And for the North Gulf Coast tomorrow, as well as the Barren Islands, winds all areas there out of the east at 40 to 45 knots. Gale warnings, southern Cook Inlet, Kamishak Bay, northeast at 35 knots. Otherwise, northern Cook Inlet, northeast 25. Gale warnings for Prince William Sound, east at 35 knots, seas 9 feet. Monday, lighter winds here for northern Cook Inlet, back down to 15 knots, still out of the north, and northeast 25. Southern Cook Inlet, small craft advisories here for Kamishak Bay, east winds at 30. Southeast 25 for the Barren Islands, and east to southeast winds 25 to 35 knots for the North Gulf Coast. Prince William Sound, east winds at 30 knots. Kodiak Island, northeast winds 25 to 30 knots for the day Sunday. Variable to east winds 10 to 20 knots for the Alaska Peninsula, winds east at 20 for Bristol Bay. And then for Monday, south to southwest winds 20 to 25 knots for the peninsula, east to 20 for Bristol Bay and Kodiak Island, south winds 15 to 20 knots. Eastern and central Aleutians tomorrow, west and northwest winds at 30 knots. Lighter winds back out to the west, west to northwest at 15 to 25. And then for the day on Monday, western Aleutians, good gales and even storm force winds out of the northeast at 40 to 50 knots. East 35 knots for Adak and Atka. Southeast winds 25 to 30 knots for the Fox Islands. And for the western Arctic, or for the southwest coast, we've got, for the Yukon Delta coast, St. Lawrence Island, Norton Sound. Gale warnings tomorrow, northeast at 35 knots, northeast at 40 knots for St. Matthew Island, north at 30 for the Pribilofs, and northeast 25 for the Kuskokwim Delta coast. And then for the day Monday, north winds 40 knots there with 21-foot seas for St. Matthew Island. Otherwise, out of the northeast at 30 for the Pribilofs, northeast 30 Norton Sound, north to northeast 25 for the Yukon Delta coast, St. Lawrence Island, and northeast 25 for the Kuskokwim Delta coast. North to west winds at 10 knots for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, with north winds at 15 for the central coast, northeast 25 for the western coast, and pretty windy here for the Chukchi Sea with gale warnings out for north to northeast winds 35 to 40 knots. And north to northeast at 30 to 35 knots for the Chukchi Sea on Monday, so a little lighter on the winds, but still pretty brisk. Northeast at 20 for the western Arctic coast, central coast northeast 15 knots. That same forecast is good for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast as well.